Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we begin in a room that smells faintly of lavender, ink, and shoes that are 2 sizes too tight. The year is 1729. The town? Stettin. Technically Prussia, but the borders are going to shift so many times that we may as well just say, somewhere in rainy northern Europe. You are a very small girl, about the size of a large house cat, and your name is Sophie Friedrich August von Anhalt-Zerbst, which, you have to admit, is a lot of name for someone who can barely hold a spoon. Your house is nice enough. It has windows, a few portraits, and a mother who is ambitious in the way that hurricanes are ambitious. She doesn't just want you to marry well. She wants you to marry up the food chain of Europe until the family name starts showing up in history books. But for now, you mostly play pretend empress with your dolls. You make them bow to each other before tea. One of them, named Ivan, always loses his head. It's a bit of foreshadowing. Your father is a general in the Prussian army. He's not around much. When he is, he mostly looks tired, like someone who just opened an important drawer and forgot what he was looking for. He thinks girls should be quiet and boys should wear armor. Your mother disagrees. Your mother thinks girls should learn French, flirt strategically, and marry into dynasties. So, naturally, your education begins early. You learn to curtsy before you learn to write. You practice royal signatures in your diary before you've ever received a letter. You whisper Russian words into your pillow at night, even though you've never seen a single Russian outside the pages of a book. Because yes, somehow, your mother has gotten it into her head that you might marry into the Russian royal family. This is not completely impossible. Russia's ruling family, the Romanovs, are known to pick spouses from minor German houses like yours. They have dynastic needs and a taste for Lutheran brides with sharp cheekbones and fluent French. Still, it's a long shot. But fate, as always, loves a quiet plot twist. One day, a letter arrives that it smells like wax and cold that it is sealed with the insignia of Empress Elizabeth of Russia. That's right, Russia. The country with bears, ballet, and about 9,000 kinds of snow. The Empress has a nephew, Peter. He's 15, moody, obsessed with toy soldiers and Frederick the Great. And, crucially, unmarried. You are selected, not for your beauty, not for your wealth, but for your bloodline and the way you don't faint at court dinners. There are whispers, of course, that Peter isn't quite well, that he might be better suited to leading a puppet show than an empire, that he salutes his soup and talks to portraits. But that's fine. You're not being sent to marry a man. You're being sent to become someone new. The trip to Russia is long. There are blizzards and border checks. Your coach creaks like an old man's knees. You eat bread so hard it might be a weapon. But finally, you arrive at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. You are introduced to the Empress. She looks like powdered steel. She inspects you like you are both a kitten and a state treaty. Then, with a nod, she decides, yes, you are to convert to Russian Orthodoxy. You are to become Catherine. You are to marry Peter. And just like that, Sophie from Prussia vanishes. Catherine, Grand Duchess of Russia, is born. Now, quick reality check. You are 15. You are living in a palace so cold in winter, the ink freezes in the wells. Your future husband prefers military drills to conversation, and once tried to train a rat to lead an army of tin soldiers. Also, he's very fond of talking about how much he misses Prussia, which, if you recall, is where you're from, and not a place most Russians enjoy hearing about. But you play the part. You study Orthodox prayers, even when you don't understand half of them. You learn to speak Russian, even though the grammar seems invented by pranksters. You write letters, hundreds of them to your mother, your old tutors, yourself. And in those letters, a pattern starts to form. A kind of map, not of where you are, but of where you're going. And, spoiler, it's not where anyone expects. Section 2. You are now called Catherine, but it doesn't quite fit yet. The name feels like a stiff pair of boots, technically yours, but not broken in. You say it out loud in your new quarters, softly. Ekaterina Alexievna. It echoes back at you with too many syllables. You practice the signature over and over, each too dramatic, each too apologetic. Eventually, the ink runs smoother. Eventually, the name fits. Peter, your fiancé, is not adapting quite as well that he spends most of his time in his own wing of the palace, playing war games with miniature soldiers, staging pretend invasions of Sweden in the hallway, and occasionally attempting to discipline the servants using military commands they don't recognize. Once, you hear he tried to knight a turnip. Another time, he confesses that he prefers Prussia's Frederick the Great to his own aunt, the Empress of Russia, a political stance roughly equivalent to bringing a snowball to a cannon fight. But you smile. You always smile. Because Catherine, this new, foreign name, you've realized, is not just a label. It's a role. And roles, you've learned from endless operas and palace plays, are performed best when no one sees the rehearsals. You begin your performance in earnest. The court is a snow globe of ritual. Every movement, every syllable is choreographed. You are expected to glide, not walk. Speak, not chatter. Nod with meaning. Laugh without teeth. Your lessons continue, now under Orthodox tutors. You're expected to adopt your new religion wholeheartedly, not just in public, but in dreams. So you cross yourself in the mirror. You rehearse ancient hymns in a language whose alphabet looks like a decorative warning label. Still, you persist. Historians still debate whether your conversion was genuine or merely practical. But then again, what does genuine mean when you're 15, surrounded by strangers, and your entire future depends on the firmness of your bow? One afternoon, you receive a note from Empress Elizabeth. It is brief and smells of lavender and old lace. You are to be baptized next Thursday. Wear the blue gown. The church is prepared. You read it 3 times. Not because the words are confusing, but because you're unsure how to feel. It is not fear. Not quite. It is more like you are a cup being poured into another cup. The ceremony is long, glittering, and cold. A cathedral built to humble empires swallows your footsteps. Candles flicker like nervous courtiers. A priest whose beard belongs in a painting murmurs ancient phrases over your bowed head. You are rechristened Ekaterina. You emerge changed. Not because of the water, but because of the eyes. Everyone is watching now. Peter is not interested in your transformation. He gives you a half-hearted compliment, tells you look reasonably holy, and then disappears into his rooms to compose a letter to a Prussian general. You imagine it's full of spelling errors and misplaced loyalties. But your gaze is elsewhere now. You are watching the Empress. Elizabeth, grand and powdered, sweeps through the court like a storm made of perfume. She rules with a glittered iron fist, one that is always smiling, never shaking. She is what power looks like when it wears earrings. And you begin to wonder, is she watching you too? Months pass. The wedding approaches. You are 16 now, and the dress they've chosen for you has more embroidery than some countries have laws. You are told to smile wider, curtsy deeper, and pretend this is the happiest day of your life. You obey. The wedding is splendid, theatrical, and slightly ridiculous. Peter forgets his lines during the ceremony and mutters, "Oops," when he almost drops the ring. You pretend not to notice. After all, he is technically a Grand Duke. He technically outranks you, but everyone knows that technically doesn't mean much in this palace. The first few nights of married life are quiet. You sleep alone more often than not. Peter spends his evenings with his toy soldiers, reenacting famous battles, and once, tragically, trying to teach a pug to salute. You lie awake, reading by candlelight, or writing letters to no one in particular. You begin to collect silence. To treasure it becomes your private kingdom, and within that kingdom, you begin to plan. You keep your observations tucked between diary pages, which guards are loyal to whom, which nobles whisper behind fans, which servants trade secrets for sugar. Nothing obvious, just breadcrumbs. But enough that, one day, if the path opens, you'll be ready to follow it. And meanwhile, you play the part, the devoted wife, the obedient convert, the foreign girl who is slowly becoming more Russian than the Russians. You smile. You study. And one snowy morning, without anyone realizing it, you stop pretending. You are no longer Sophie. You are no longer only the future wife of Peter. You are, in every way that matters, Catherine. And somewhere in the quiet halls of the Winter Palace, history begins to shift its weight, ever so slightly, in your direction. Section 3. By now, you've mastered the art of saying everything without really saying anything. A smile can mean, "Thank you, I see," or "I know you're lying, and I'm filing it away for later." A curtsy can be a hello, a warning, or a perfectly polite goodbye to someone who may soon find themselves mysteriously reassigned to a far-off province with no horses. That you've learned this from the best. From Empress Elizabeth, whose court is a theater of silk and silence. Here, words are fragile things. It's the unspoken that moves thrones, which is why, when the moment comes, it isn't dramatic. It's oddly quiet. Peter is now officially heir to the Russian throne. But no one, not even the dust in the chandeliers, seems thrilled about it. He parades around in Prussian uniforms, still idolizes Frederick the Great, and has taken to muttering strategy tips at dinner like he's narrating a chess match only he can see. You, on the other hand, have become fluent in Russian, not just the language, but the mood of the place. You wear it like a second skin. The Russian people like you, the nobility likes you, and the guards, well, they nod a little deeper when they pass you now, which brings us to one very rainy night in 1762. Empress Elizabeth is dead. The court goes still, like someone turned off the music at a ball. Peter becomes Emperor Peter III. The moment he's crowned, he begins enacting reforms that confuse, irritate, or outright offend nearly everyone. He makes peace with Prussia, an enemy Russia had spent years fighting, without consulting a single Russian general. He insults the Orthodox Church. He alienates nobles, offends the army, and once tried to replace official court portraits with caricatures drawn by himself. Historians still argue whether Peter was wildly unfit to rule, mentally unstable, or just painfully unaware of how loud his ideas sounded inside marble walls. But you see the opportunity. You do not raise your voice. You do not stomp. You do not even frown. Instead, you begin to move, quietly. First, you reach out to the Imperial Guard. Not all at once. Just the right captains. The ones who know that loyalty sometimes depends on who brings the warmest boots in winter. Then, you speak to the nobility. A whispered promise here. A graceful nod there. You assure them stability. You assure them continuity. You assure them that you are not here to cause chaos. You are here to prevent it. And the most miraculous part, you mean it. One morning, Peter is away at his summer palace, playing soldier with guests who are increasingly unsure whether this is a party or a hostage situation. You remain in St. Petersburg, and as dawn peeks through the clouds like a curious bystander, a knock sounds at your door. It is time. You dress not in royal finery, but in a simple soldier's uniform. Blue, crisp. You ride out to the barracks, where troops are waiting, stiff-backed and squinting. They kneel one by one. The Orthodox Archbishop anoints you with holy water and declares you Catherine II, Empress of Russia. You do not cry. You do not faint. You thank them, quietly. Then you ride toward the city on a borrowed horse, as bells ring from every tower like applause from the sky. Peter, hearing of this, panics. He tries to gather supporters. They don't arrive. He attempts to flee. There's nowhere to go. He abdicates, rather quickly, in fact. Later, he dies under mysterious circumstances, officially, of hemorrhoidal colic, though most people just raise an eyebrow and move on. You do not gloat. You do not explain, because Catherine does not explain. She reigns, and thus, your coup is complete. No bloodbath, no battles. Just boots on stone, whispers in hallways, and the slow, deliberate shifting of power from one hand to another. like passing a candle in the dark. Even your critics have to admit. It was efficient. You are 33 years old, and you are now empress of all the Russias. Not because of a war, not because of a birthright, but because you learned, better than anyone, how to wait and how to strike softly. Section 4. Your coronation robe is red. So red it makes rubies look like they've been holding their breath. It weighs nearly 60 pounds. That's not a metaphor. The fabric, the fur, the embroidery, the expectations, all of it presses down on your shoulders like a physical reminder. You have arrived, but you are also being watched. You walk slowly, not just because the robe insists on it, but because haste is no longer part of your vocabulary. The crown is heavy, too. Diamonds, gold, one improbably large spinel on top, like a cherry on the world's most serious Sunday. You wear it as if it were part of your skull. The entire court watches, breath caught like snowflakes. And when the priest lowers his hand and announces your name, Catherine II, you do not flinch. You smile. It is not joy. It is recognition. Being empress is not the same as becoming empress. You discover this almost immediately. Your ministers are nervous. The foreign ambassadors are confused. Your guards are loyal, but they still whisper at night, just in case history changes its mind again. And so, you begin your reign with something deceptively simple. Letters. You write to Voltaire, to Diderot, to anyone with a pen, prestige, and a library large enough to require a ladder. You ask about governance. You ask about justice. You ask about the role of reason in a state that still believes in divine right and samovars. Voltaire is delighted. He writes back quickly, with flattery dipped in Latin. Your Majesty, he says, is the only truly enlightened despot. You blush, then you underline the word despot. Your correspondence becomes famous. You, the German-born Russian empress, are suddenly the most glamorous pen pal in Europe. Historians still argue whether you truly believed in Enlightenment ideals or simply saw them as excellent dinner party material. But your letters were sincere. They were curious. They were detailed. You once debated Diderot about serfdom for 5 pages straight, then invited him to St. Petersburg just to show him your library. He came. He brought notes. You gave him tea. He left unconvinced, but impressed by the pastries. Meanwhile, back in Russia, things are complicated. You rule an empire that stretches across continents. Your people speak dozens of languages. Some have never seen a road. Others have never seen snow. You must unify this so you begin to codify laws. You assemble a commission. Hundreds of nobles, officials, and scholars are summoned. You give them a draft called the Nakaz, a sweeping instruction manual inspired by Enlightenment philosophy. It suggests ideas like equality before the law and the abolition of torture. It also, unfortunately, suggests things no one in your empire is remotely ready for. Still, it makes a statement. Russia now has a ruler who reads. You attend meetings. You inspect troops. You hold audiences with ambassadors who keep trying to flirt in French. You ignore them politely. You design uniforms. You correct maps. You commission paintings, not of battles, but of science. Every detail matters, even the buttons, especially the buttons. At night, you retreat to your study. You write. You edit policy. You draft notes in the margins of philosophy books like a student trying to outwit the footnotes. You reread Greek tragedies and laugh softly at the melodrama. You keep a copy of Montesquieu next to your candle, just in case the mood strikes. And always, you ask questions. What does it mean to be good? What does it mean to be powerful? Can a woman be both? By now, your court is transforming. Servants hum foreign tunes. Portraits of Voltaire begin to appear in palace halls. The chandeliers reflect not just light, but ideas. You are not just reigning. You are branding. Catherine the Great, enlightened autocrat, philosopher-queen. It sounds grand, but you know better. You are still that girl from Prussia who practiced smiles in the mirror. Only now, The mirror is 10 feet tall and framed in gold. Outside, in the far corners of your empire, people still freeze in winter and bow in spring. Some have never heard of you. Others think you're a myth. But in St. Petersburg, in the rooms that matter, your voice is on every page. Your shadow touches every candle. And when you close your eyes at night, the questions do not stop. They are just quieter now, because you have begun to answer them. Section 5. You always imagined power would feel like applause. Instead, it feels like paperwork. Endless scrolls and petitions, reports on grain prices in provinces you've never seen, summaries of military behavior in places with names that sound like coughs. You sign your name, so often you begin to forget what it means. Sometimes you scribble it just to see how fast you can go. Catherine, 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 as if speed might make you feel more in control. But the truth is, you are in control that no one says it aloud, of course. They still call you Her Majesty, Empress, Mother of the Nation. But when you enter a room, people adjust themselves. Slightly. They blink less. They stand straighter. Their sentences trail off a little more respectfully. That it's not fear. Not yet. But it is awareness. And that, you've learned, is half the battle. Peter is gone. His memory lingers in portraits, in the occasional muttered comment from courtiers who remember his obsession with toy soldiers and contradictory decrees. But mostly, the empire has moved on. You've made sure of that. You don't erase the past. You just reframe it. You order new coins with your face, not too proud, not too stern, just thoughtful. You oversee architecture, not too grand, not too gaudy, just modern. And your greatest project yet? A palace of books. It starts small, a few volumes delivered in lacquered cases. A donation from a noble here. A dusty scroll from a monastery there. But soon, your collection grows. Shelves are added. Rooms are redesigned. The palace itself seems to shift around your library like it's making space for an idea. You call it the Hermitage at first. No one pays much attention. After all, what's one more fancy building in a city full of them? But then, the art arrives. You start with paintings, Dutch still lives, Italian portraits, a few French landscapes that look like they were painted while the artist was slightly tipsy and extremely in love. You hang them with care, not just where they look nice, but where they tell a story. Then you acquire sculpture, then Greek antiquities, then a collection that once belonged to a British aristocrat who went bankrupt buying snuff boxes and Enlightenment dreams. Soon, other collectors start to worry. The Empress of Russia, they whisper, is building something that she's not just ruling, she's curating. Historians today still marvel at the Hermitage. What began as a private gallery is now one of the largest museums on Earth. But back then, it was your retreat. Your secret garden made of ink and oil paint and ideas. You would walk its halls alone, in slippers, before breakfast. You would pause in front of a bust of Homer and ask him if he preferred tragedy or comedy. You would nod at Voltaire's portrait and thank him, just a little, for writing back all those years ago. You would linger in front of a tiny landscape no one else noticed, a scene of two women walking along a riverbank. You liked that painting best. You never said why. Meanwhile, your court grows increasingly sophisticated. French is spoken more than Russian. Your advisors quote Plato, sometimes correctly. Your ladies-in-waiting host salons that would make Paris blush. And through it all, you remain constant. You smile. You listen. You take notes. Sometimes, you challenge them with a single eyebrow. Other times, you simply serve the tea and let silence make your point. There are rumors, of course, that you sleep only 4 hours a night, that you write faster than your scribes can copy, that you once solved a diplomatic crisis with a metaphor about horses. Most of them are true. You write plays now, short ones. Witty, light on plot, heavy on politics. You stage them in your private theater. Guests applaud politely, sometimes nervously. You watch their reactions more than the performance, because every play is a rehearsal for something greater. And still, you read, every night, before by candlelight, in a chair too soft to leave quickly. Sometimes it's philosophy, sometimes it's Greek history. Sometimes it's scandalous French novels that you pretend not to enjoy quite as much as you do. The guards outside your room hear the rustle of pages long after the palace has gone quiet. They call you the reading empress. You pretend not to hear, but secretly, it's your favorite title. Section 6. It's easy to forget, sometimes, that your empire is stitched together by more than books and balls. It's stitched with ice, with cold rivers that don't flow for 6 months of the year, with forests so dense the trees gossip in dialects, with provinces where the nearest official outpost is 3 horses and a miracle away. And so, as empress, you travel. Not every ruler does. Some sit on thrones and let the empire come to them. You prefer to go see what it looks like when no one's watching. Your advisors try to dissuade you. The roads are muddy, they say. The inns are drafty. There's nothing but cabbage past a certain latitude. You smile politely and pack your furs. The journeys begin modestly. A tour of nearby estates. A visit to the newly built school in Smolensk. You shake hands. You distribute medals. You taste soup that tastes mostly of salt and affection. But soon, the journeys grow to be by the time you plan your trip to Crimea. The court is in a frenzy. This is not just a visit. This is a statement. Let's set the stage. Crimea has only recently been annexed. It's a glittering prize, strategically vital, rich in history, perched like a crown jewel at the edge of empire. But it's also delicate. Your presence there will be noticed. Enter Grigory Potemkin, your sometime lover, full-time genius of imperial theater. He is tasked with organizing the journey, the route, and, more importantly, the presentation. Potemkin does not disappoint. Villages are freshly painted, serfs are dressed in new clothes, temporary towns, complete with livestock, dancing children, and cheerful banners, are constructed along your path. Each time you pass, it looks like a celebration. Each time you look back, it quietly vanishes. It is a performance, yes, but a loving one. And frankly, more believable than some of the operas you've commissioned. You ride in a custom-built sleigh in winter, then a gilded coach in spring. You wave so often your wrist begins to develop a small rebellion. You meet local leaders, bless new buildings, kiss babies, and taste more varieties of bread than you thought existed. You even pause to admire a grove of lemon trees grown specifically to impress you. They do. Now, people today love to talk about Potemkin villages, fake facades, trickery, smoke, and mirrors. But here's the thing. The trip worked. It dazzled, it inspired, it told a story of progress so compelling that even the skeptics paused. Historians still argue whether the villages were real, half real, or theatrical genius. But you know better. You weren't fooled. You were flattered. And sometimes, flattery is just good statecraft in a powdered wig. When you return to St. Petersburg, you're greeted like a hero. The nobles applaud. The papers sigh. Even the weather seems impressed. You retire to your study, remove your boots, and write Potemkin a note. Next time, fewer lemons. More honest sheep. Your travels continue in other forms. You send scholars to Siberia to record languages. You dispatch artists to paint mountains. You order that roadways be mapped, rivers surveyed, schools recorded. You are not trying to shrink the empire, that you're trying to know it, because only what is known can be ruled kindly. Of course, there are challenges. Famine crops up like a rude guest. Plague visits when least convenient. Bandits occasionally test your patience, but you do not flinch. You convene your councils. You write directives. You, ever the bookworm, send copies of best agricultural practices to regional governors, who sometimes mistake them for recipe books. You sigh and send simplified versions. At night, you mark your journeys on a map. Tiny flags, little pins. Each one a reminder. You were there. You listened. You saw. Your servants think it's decoration, But it's not that it's a diary in geography. And one morning, while sipping your famously mediocre tea, you realize something quietly thrilling. You no longer feel like a foreigner. You no longer feel like you're borrowing this throne. You are Catherine. You are Russia, and the empire, for all its distance and diversity, is beginning to whisper that name back. Section 7. You're not supposed to have favorites. But you do. His name is Grigory. Last name Potemkin. Officially, he's your military advisor, your court architect, your governor general, your imperial consultant for things both strategic and occasionally absurd. Unofficially? Well, he's everything. Let's be clear, this is not some fevered romance novel, despite what the gossip letters in Vienna might suggest. You and Potemkin are far too busy for candlelit violin duets or sighing on balconies. Instead, you build things, fleets, cities, systems, and something stranger. Trust that he is one of the few people you don't need to perform for. He knows the difference between Catherine the Empress and Catherine the woman who occasionally falls asleep on reports and wakes up with ink on her nose. He teases you about it. You pretend to mind. At court, you remain properly distanced that he bows. You nod that he reports on Crimea's roads. You respond with an inquiry about river tariffs. It's all very professional. Very boring. Except for the notes. You pass them like school children with better handwriting. Short, sharp, and full of references no one else understands. The lemons survived. I did not. Send tea. Your maps are lovely. Less so the marshes. I fear I've offended the Swedish ambassador again. Please handle. With lace. It's diplomacy wrapped in dry wit. And honestly, it's the only part of court life that feels like breathing. You build palaces together, not just the grand ones with chandeliers and gold leaf, but practical ones. Administrative centers, naval bases, colonies, towns with fountains and schools, and sometimes suspiciously well-dressed cows. He gets things done, quickly, elegantly, occasionally illegally. You don't ask too many questions, but you do send fruit baskets afterward. Historians still debate whether you and Potemkin were secretly married. No records exist. No public vow was made. But the devotion is undeniable. When he leaves court, you write letters nearly every day. When he returns, you pretend not to notice how quickly the mood in the palace lightens, that it's not passion that defines your relationship. It's partnership. You see the same Russia. You dream the same absurd, beautiful dreams, that a modern empire, that a learned court, that a nation that governs with both strength and style. Of course, it can't last forever. Power never does. Eventually, even Potemkin begins to tire. His health wavers. His beard whitens. He becomes more contemplative, less playful, still sharp, still brilliant, but quieter. And one autumn, in 1791, while inspecting troops along the Black Sea, he collapses in his coach. You are not there. The letter reaches you 2 days later. It says, simply, he is gone. You retreat to your rooms. The No1 sees you for 3 days. The court speculates, whispers, adjusts its schedules. You do not explain. You resume your duties. But the notes stop, and the hallways feel a little colder. You order a memorial, elegant, modest, at a marble bust and a plaque. But privately, in your study, you keep one of his maps. The corners are torn that there's an ink blot shaped like a question mark. You never frame it, but it stays on your desk, always slightly crooked, as if daring you to straighten it. You never do. Still, the work continues, because grief, like power, doesn't pause. You sign treaties. You inspect grain shipments. You review troop movements. And at night, when the palace sleeps, you walk the halls alone, passing by portraits, passing by the silence he used to fill. You are still Catherine. You are still Empress. But sometimes, when the wind rattles the windows just right, you almost hear his boots in the marble corridor. Almost. Section 8. You don't believe in sitting still. Even grief, once folded and filed away, becomes a layer in your ever-expanding empire of motion. If Potemkin taught you anything, it's that you can mourn and build at the same time. So you do. And what you build next is not just roads or palaces. It's an image. By now, you've ruled longer than most people stay married. Your face is on every coin. Your signature is etched into more treaties than some kings ever read. But you're not interested in being remembered merely as the empress who lasted. You want to be remembered as the empress who mattered. And so, you begin to craft your myth. Not with trumpets or parades, but with something far more powerful, narrative. You commission portraits, dozens of them. In some, you wear armor. In others, a scholar's robe. Occasionally, you pose with a scroll or a scepter or a small, well-behaved dog. You are always calm, always composed, always Catherine, but each image whispers something slightly different. Warrior, philosopher, matron, muse. You've realized something that most monarchs never do. History isn't just written, it's illustrated. You also begin to write your own memoirs, quietly, carefully. You don't rush. You draft and redraft, consulting no one. This is not for the court. This is for the page. You begin with your childhood. You describe Sophie from Stettin. You do not cry. You do not embellish. You simply tell the story as if you're setting a bone. Gently, firmly, knowing it must bear weight later. Meanwhile, your policies continue. You expand education, particularly for women. Some nobles scoff. You ignore them. You've spent your life proving that intellect isn't bound by corsets. You open more schools. You fund translation projects. You encourage science, not the flashy kind with explosions, but the quiet, slow sort that maps stars and categorizes insects. Russia, under your rule, becomes a place where curiosity is not punished but published. You still hold salons. Now, however, you guide the conversations. The nobles don't always notice. They think they're steering things. You smile and change the topic with a raised eyebrow. One spring, a young French philosopher visits your court. He wears too much perfume and speaks as if he's addressing a theater crowd. He tries to lecture you on Montesquieu. You nod, then quote Montesquieu. Accurately, eloquently, and from memory that he blinks. You offer him tea that he accepts it quietly. The truth is, you enjoy being underestimated. It allows you to move in spaces other rulers find too subtle. You negotiate trade routes over chess games. You win allies with lullabies. You rework tax codes in the margins of poetry that it's not subterfuge that it's style. And style, in your court, is everything. Your fashion evolves. Heavier silks in winter, lighter muslins in summer. You favor pearls over diamonds now. Soft, subtle, luminous. Your language shifts, too. You speak Russian with confidence, French with elegance, German with amusement. Your accent in each is slight but intentional, enough to remind people that you are from everywhere and nowhere, that you are Catherine because you chose to be. Still, age begins to show itself. Your handwriting stiffens. Your mornings start slower. You find yourself rereading books you once devoured in a day, but you do not retreat. You remain visible, deliberate, present. You attend meetings. You approve ships. You correct spelling in diplomatic letters. You add footnotes to your own speeches, because being empress, as you now understand deeply, is not just about commanding. It's about consistency, about showing up again and again, until even the marble believes you belong. And when you pass through your favorite gallery in the Hermitage, now so full it echoes softly with paint fumes and footfalls, you pause in front of a small painting no one else ever asks about. Two women by a river, still walking, still talking, still together. You straighten the frame and continue down the corridor, step by step, deeper into your legacy. Section 9. There's a knock at your study door. Not the kind that demands your attention, just the soft, respectful tap of someone who knows you're reading, but needs to interrupt anyway. You sigh, gently fold the corner of your page, and give permission. A courier enters, bows too low, and hands you a letter. It's from the provinces. Another request. Another complaint. Another thinly veiled warning that not everyone in your sprawling empire is thrilled with the pace of your reforms. You read it twice. Then you reach for your quill. You've learned that ruling Russia means juggling contradictions. Your cities glow with Enlightenment polish, philosophical debates, candlelit salons, libraries that breathe like old trees. But your countryside? It is still mired in the mud of feudal life. Serfs who till soil they don't own. Lords who think justice is something measured in whips, that you've tried to change this, that you've written new laws. You've promoted education. You've banned certain forms of corporal punishment. Not that anyone in the outer provinces is keeping score, but every time you push the nobles, they push back. And you need the nobles, because armies aren't led by pamphlets, and taxes aren't collected by optimism. You remember a meeting once, years ago, that a young noble, fresh-faced and flush with wine, asked why you didn't just free the serfs. You looked at him, tired, amused, and said, "Because then who would serve your soup, dear?" He laughed. You didn't. It isn't that you don't believe in freedom. You do. You believe in it the way a gardener believes in spring, with hope, but also deep suspicion of the frost. Russia, you've come to understand, is not France. It doesn't burst into revolution with a trumpet fanfare and cake. It creaks. It groans. It resists. Still, you try. You invite foreign engineers to build better roads. You commission surveys of farmland. You fund village schools, even when the students outnumber the books. 5-1. You read every letter sent from the countryside. Every single one. And when the ink is smudged, when the grammar is poor, when the writer seems more afraid than angry, you write back yourself. You write slowly, clearly, not as an empress as a listener. You begin to realize that reform isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's as small as changing the official ink formula so that it doesn't freeze in winter. Sometimes it's as personal as granting a widow in Kazan permission to keep her husband's land. These moments don't make headlines, but they make history. Quietly, one winter, word arrives of unrest that a man named Pugachev is leading a rebellion in the south. He claims to be your dead husband, Peter III, which is bold, considering how dead Peter is. The peasants believe him. Or maybe they just want to believe anyone who promises them boots and bread. You act swiftly. Troops are sent. The rebellion is crushed, but you don't gloat. You study the uprising. You read the manifestos. You note every village that joined and why. And you make a quiet decision. More reform, but slower. Your advisors argue. Some say you're being too cautious. Others say you're not cautious enough. You listen. You sip your tea. You send everyone home with a cookie. Then you make your own decision, because you are Catherine, and you've learned that sometimes an empire can only turn as fast as its oldest card. In private, you keep a list, a handwritten ledger. On one side. Things I've changed. On the other. Things I will change. It is not short, but it is not hopeless. You look at it. Before bed. Sometimes you add something. Sometimes you just trace the ink with your finger and whisper, "Not yet." And sleep comes a little easier after that. Section 10. You're 48 now. Not old. At least not by royal standards, though definitely past the age where diplomats try to impress you with their dance moves. Your hair is more powdered than styled these days. Your dresses are cut for authority, not flirtation. But your pen? Still sharp enough to wound, and graceful enough to charm a roomful of skeptics. The world has changed around you. Europe is restless. France is starting to twitch in its velvet sleeves. Philosophers are beginning to sound like generals. And generals, increasingly, have opinions about philosophy. You watch it all with quiet calculation. From St. Petersburg, the fire looks distant, but you know better. Back home, the court continues its gentle ballet. There are new faces, younger nobles, stiffer uniforms. They speak with affected confidence, quoting Rousseau like he's a personal friend. You listen patiently. Then you ask them to explain Rousseau's second discourse. They pause. They sweat. You smiled. It's good to remind people that you didn't just read the Enlightenment. You bookmarked it. And speaking of books, your collection now rivals that of entire universities that you've expanded the Hermitage. Again, whole new wings now house sculptures, manuscripts, even a mechanical peacock that flaps its wings once a day to polite applause from visitors who don't quite understand it but feel impressed anyway. You still walk the gallery each morning, slower now, but with the same careful eye that it's not about ownership, that it's about perspective. You've grown more reflective lately, not nostalgic. Reflection is never about yearning, that it's about editing. You begin to revise your memoirs, you add footnotes, you correct minor inaccuracies, mostly about Peter. He's still dead, after all. No harm in tidying up the narrative. You also soften your tone in certain chapters, not because you've changed your mind, but because you understand your audience, and empresses, like playwrights, know how to revise a second act. Sometimes, late at night, you think about Sophie, the girl you used to be, the one who left Prussia with a trunk full of books and a name no one could pronounce. You wonder what she would think of this life. Would she recognize herself in the mirror? Would she admire the throne? Would she laugh at the powdered wig? You don't answer. You just leave a space in the thought for breathing. Meanwhile, politics march on. You strengthen your grip on the Black Sea. You negotiate a trade deal with the British that involves, among other things, herring. You reorganize the postal service. You rewrite a tax code. And you still find time to argue, at length, about punctuation in imperial decrees. Because no empire falls apart faster than one with misplaced commas. You begin to notice that the nobles treat you differently now, not with less respect, but with a kind of reverence that if you've become a statue they're still afraid might speak. You don't mind that it keeps things orderly, and besides, reverence is just silence with better posture. Every so often, you still surprise them. You arrive early to council meetings. You remember everyone's birthday. You make a joke, dry, precise, and watch the younger ministers try to decide whether laughing is permitted. You let them sweat, that it keeps them warm in winter. Your nights are quieter now. The fire crackles. Your cat, who answers to no one but seems to tolerate you, sleeps on your lap. You read by candlelight, occasionally muttering corrections when the translation is poor. You drink tea that you still pretend to enjoy. And just before bed, you cross off one more item on your ever-dwindling list of reforms. Nothing big, just something small, like improving census procedures, but still, progress. And in your dreams, sometimes, the halls of the Winter Palace stretch forever. You walk them barefoot, the paintings whisper, the chandeliers sway, and Sophie is always just one room ahead, turning the corner, never quite out of reach. Section 11. If Russia is a puzzle, then by now you've seen most of its pieces. You've visited its southern edge, where the Black Sea smells of salt and ambition. You've walked through snowdrifts taller than horses. You've eaten things you'd rather not discuss in polite company. You've governed deserts, forests, frozen steppes, and cities that blink into existence like punctuation marks on a very large sentence. But there's one place even you haven't fully explored, your own palace. The Winter Palace is enormous. It is a living thing, moaning in cold, breathing with candle smoke, whispering through carpets, and echoing through ballrooms. There are rumors that it contains entire rooms no one has opened in decades. Forgotten wings, sealed staircases, an attic with a piano that plays by itself. You decide to investigate. Not officially, of course, you are still Empress. But one morning, after a particularly boring cabinet meeting about grain shipment redundancies, you slip out of your office and into the halls with nothing but slippers and curiosity. It begins as a simple walk. You pass the usual portraits, generals with mustaches shaped like opinions, noble women wearing enough lace to collapse under a sneeze. Then you find a hallway you don't recognize. The carpet is faded. The air is cooler. You follow it. Left, then right. The candles flicker like they've just remembered you exist. Eventually, you find a door that sticks when you push it. Inside, dust, a broken chair, a map of Russia with the Caspian Sea misspelled, and something else. Your own handwriting, feigned on a scrap of parchment, that a note from your first year as Empress that you'd forgotten this room, that you'd forgotten this version of yourself. You sit down and reread it. It's a list out of reforms, out of hopes, out of doubts. Some of them have been accomplished. Some never will be. Point one item reads, teach myself astronomy. You chuckle. You never did. But the stars, at least, were patient. You spend the rest of the morning wandering. You find a broken globe with half of Asia missing. You find a cabinet full of unopened diplomatic gifts, embroidered gloves from Bavaria, a mechanical squirrel from the Netherlands, an awkwardly shaped vase from Denmark that may be upside down. You wonder who stored them here. You wonder if you did. You wonder if you'll forget again. Eventually, you return to your study. You dust off your dress. You brush a cobweb from your sleeve. You pour yourself tea, still bad, and you write a new list. This time, shorter. This time, softer. It begins. Things I would tell my younger self. Meanwhile, outside your palace, the empire hums. Your bureaucrats argue about tax assessments. Your generals file reports so heavily edited they read like gossip columns. Your foreign ministers fret over what the Swedes might be plotting. Probably nothing. But it's fun to speculate. And the people? They keep living. Farming, praying, complaining, singing. Some of them still curse your name. Some of them carve it into wood. Most simply carry on, which is, perhaps, the truest kind of legacy. A late one night, you receive a letter. It isn't signed. Written in shaky script. It says, my village now has a school. My son can read. Thank you. You keep it in a drawer, not framed, not displayed, just kept, because sometimes the smallest echoes are the loudest. And when you next walk through the palace, you find yourself humming. A little off-key, but entirely sincere, because you've built something more than policy. You've built a rhythm, and it carries you, gently, room to room, even into those corners you forgot to remember. Section 12. There's a new ambassador at court. Young, Polish, hair so polished it reflects chandeliers. He bows too low, speaks too fast, and tries very hard to seem both impressed and unimpressed at once. You watch him like a cat watches a particularly talkative bird. He hands you a letter. It's from his king. Something about trade routes and tribute, phrased in the usual royal Latin, which is to say, overly complex and mildly poetic. You smile. You offer him tea. And while he's still fumbling with the cup, you speak to him, in perfect Polish. He drops the saucer. It's not that you enjoy startling people. You just find it efficient. Why waste a week of diplomatic ice-breaking when you can meld it in a sentence? And besides, Poland is on your mind. More than you'd like to admit. Let's talk about Poland. Once a proud kingdom, now, well, it's complicated. A monarchy where the nobles elect their king. A system that sounds charming in theory and disastrous in practice. The country is riddled with factions, foreign influences, and more internal arguments than a court full of playwrights. And it sits directly beside your empire, wobbly, rich in farmland, temptingly close. You don't invade. You don't threaten. You do something more elegant. You install your former lover as king. Technically, of course, he was elected. But elections are flexible when your empire's army is parked just outside the voting booth. His name is Stanislav. He's handsome, literate, politely terrified of you. Perfect. Historians still argue about your motives. Were you trying to protect Russia? Expand your influence? Or just see if you could pull it off? The answer, of course, is yes. To all of it, you are Catherine, and when the map stares back at you, your fingers twitch. But Poland resists, not officially, not loudly, just awkwardly. Its nobles argue, its borders shift, its people protest in poems and passive-aggressive church sermons. And so, slowly, strategically, you begin to chip away. Not alone, of course. Prussia and Austria help point 3 partitions over several decades. Surgical, bloodless, By imperial standards, point one day, Poland is there. Then it's smaller. Then it's not. You don't gloat. You don't stage parades. But in your private library, you order a new globe. The borders reflect reality. The name. Poland is smaller now, tucked under Russian shadow. And still, you write to T.O. Stanislav. To philosophers. To your own conscience. You explain your reasons. You remind them of stability, of culture, of progress. You say the word necessary a lot. You believe it. Mostly. In court, the mood is mixed. Some nobles cheer your decisiveness. Others frown into their wine. You let them that you've learned that an empire isn't run on unanimous approval, that it's run on momentum. And yours is strong. Meanwhile, the Polish ambassador resigns. The next one bows even lower. You reward him with a lukewarm biscuit. The truth is, maps are stories. And you're a writer. Not with pen and ink alone, but with borders, with armies that march like punctuation, with treaties that rewrite entire paragraphs of Europe. And you are careful, always careful, because you know what happens when stories are told too fast. They turn into revolutions. France is already humming with discontent. Whispers of liberty, of equality, of guillotines not yet built, but already imagined. You listen, you observe, and quietly, you begin to adjust your vocabulary. Less enlightenment, more order, just in case. But in the quiet corners of your mind, you wonder, how many pieces can you remove before the puzzle stops making sense? How many edits can you make before the story changes you? You don't answer. You just place another pen on your map and continue writing. Section 13. Your quill scratches softly as snow piles up on the windowsill. The draft in your study smells faintly of ink, beeswax, and the candle burning low beside your elbow. Outside, the Neva River groans beneath its icy shell. Inside, you are writing laws. Not grand ones. Not the sort that inspire painters or get quoted in salons. These are quieter. A regulation on grain weights. A clarification of district boundaries in the Urals. A revised guideline for teachers in rural schools. You've come to understand that ruling is not drama, it's repetition, clarity, patience. Sometimes, you wonder if anyone notices the difference between your most inspired decree and your least glamorous one. Then a letter arrives from a village near Orenburg. The schoolhouse now has a new roof. The teacher has a chalkboard. The children can spell Catherine. You smile. But not all news is heartwarming. Point one morning, a stack of reports arrives from your southern border. Ottoman activity, sabers rattling, treaties strained, the Black Sea, a beautiful, hard-won sea, suddenly looks smaller again. You convene your advisors. War is not inevitable, they say, but possible, probable, approaching. You do not panic. You do not pace. You reach for a map, and then for your pen. Because this war, if it comes, will be written before it's fought. Let's pause for context. You've faced the Ottomans before in the 1760s. Under your orders, the Russian army marched south with surprising grace and overwhelming numbers. Treaties were signed. Territories were ceded. Your navy even sailed into the Mediterranean, just to prove it could. It was not a small affair, it was not entirely expected, and it gave you Crimea. Now, 2 decades later, the Ottomans stir again. This time, they have new allies. France is too busy revolutionizing itself, but Britain watches with wary eyes. Austria nods politely but fidgets with its gloves. You know the game, and you're ready to play. Your generals prepare, your scribes prepare. You prepare, but you don't do it in armor. You do it in metaphors. In letters to monarchs phrased like puzzles. In speeches so carefully worded they could pass as lullabies. In promises of peace wrapped tightly around the steel of readiness. And then, war. It begins as they all do, with skirmishes and declarations, rumors and denials. But this time, something shifts. The Russian army is good, not just organized, inspired. That you've invested in training, in officers, in supply lines that you've sent generals who prefer maps to medals. And it shows. The victories are steady, not glamorous, not cinematic, just effective. Fortresses taken, borders held, sea routes secured, and all of it reported back to you in tidy dispatches that you read while feeding your cat dried anchovies. In the evenings, you still write letters to your foreign correspondents. You still edit theater scripts. You still correct grammar in court circulars, because war, as you've come to learn, is not an interruption of life, that it's just a louder version of it. Eventually, negotiations begin. The Ottomans blink first. The treaties are signed. Again, and the borders, your borders, grow. Again, you don't hold a parade. You don't give a speech, but you do spend a little longer than usual staring at your globe. Then you spin it, slowly, like a fortune teller. And later that night, in the solitude of your library, you take out your old list, the one from years ago. You add a line. Black Sea, secured. Then underneath, another. Next, keep it. Because expansion is only half the battle. The other half is memory, convincing the world that this was always yours. And that takes more than soldiers. It takes stories, maps, coins, and Catherine. Section 14. You've seen a lot of crowns in your time. Some are real, heavy with diamonds, rimmed with fur, carefully escorted in velvet boxes by men who haven't blinked since sunrise. Others are metaphorical, titles, favors, little empires of influence balanced atop powdered wigs and polite smiles. But there's one crown you didn't expect to see again, the French one. Or more specifically, the pieces of it, tumbling through newspapers, letters, and the increasingly frantic whispers of visiting diplomats. France, your old Enlightenment muse, is on fire. At first, you watch with mild concern. Bread riots? Those happen. Noble grumbling? That's Tuesday. But then the Bastille falls, and then the king is imprisoned. And then, oh dear, they cut off his head. Even your cat looks disturbed. You, Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia, philosopher queen of the North, begin receiving pamphlets from French radicals. They say things like equality and liberty and no more crowns. You stop smiling at the word liberty, not because you disagree in theory, but because your head is still firmly attached to your body, and you'd like to keep it that way. You ban the pamphlets, quietly. You double the budget for secret police, quietly. You tighten your grip on the nobility, not with punishment, but with parties. You give them distraction, silk, gossip, and 1,000 reasons to stay comfortably loyal. It works, mostly. But something inside you shifts. The French Revolution is not just a foreign crisis. It's a personal one. Voltaire is gone now. So is Diderot. You begin to reread their letters with a faint sadness. Their ideas were never meant to swing guillotines. You still believe in progress, but now you underline the word gradual. Your foreign policy shifts to more flirtation with Republican thought. You ally yourself with monarchs, real ones, the kind with armies and family trees that don't end in blood. You send letters of sympathy to Marie Antoinette's relatives. You begin to refer to order more than justice. And still, in the quiet hours, you wonder, could it happen here? Russia is not France. Your people are not Parisian bakers with time to organize and pamphlet. But hunger? Hunger is universal, and so is hope. You walk through your palace differently now. You notice which servants look away too quickly. You notice which ministers flinch when they mention taxes. You sharpen your listening. You assign new duties to old friends. You rotate officers. You remind the empire, gently, firmly, that stability is not a given. It is a gift. One afternoon, you summon your court poet. You ask him to compose a hymn, not about you, not directly, about Russia, its beauty, its peace, its wisdom. That he delivers a draft the next morning. That it's overwrought, full of metaphors about wheat and ice and faith. You edit it. You cut the flourishes. You make it simpler. You make it sing. It becomes an anthem. not just of pride, but of warning. Meanwhile, your artists keep painting, your builders keep building, your scribes keep scribbling. But now, every choice is tinged with caution. You refuse to rule with fear, but you are no longer ruling with pure optimism either. You are balancing that on in a storm with grace. And at night, when the wind howls outside your study and the candle trembles in its brass dish, you write a new entry in your private journal that it reads, "Freedom is precious, but so is sleep." You close the book and rest your hand on it, not like a writer, like a ruler. Section 15. Your hair has turned almost entirely silver now. Not the thin, brittle silver of surrender, but the polished kind, like the handle of an heirloom sword. The kind that glints in candlelight when you turn your head, as if to say, "I am not done yet." And you are not. If anything, you've become sharper. The young nobles call you the old fox, behind fans and mustaches. You don't mind. Foxes are smart. Foxes survive winters. Besides, you've always enjoyed the chase more than the crown. The empire is vast, and you know it's every drafty corridor. You've kept your map room updated, every province pinned, labeled, organized in careful grids. Borders change. Roads improve. Governors are rotated like chess pieces. But the empire, at its core, remains obedient to you. Except, you've started thinking about time. Not the day-to-day kind, but the larger question. What happens after Catherine? It's not a comfortable thought. But comfort was never your priority. Your son, Paul, is next in line that you've never been entirely sure what to do with Paul. He was born into privilege and burdened with your shadow. Raised more by generals and tutors than by you. His letters are stiff. His ideas, overly rigid. He wears uniforms even when not required and insists on scheduling breakfast. You've tried to include him. You've given him small assignments. Let him shadow meetings. Even allowed him to command a military review once, which he did with all the charisma of a stunned turnip. But still, he is your son, and Russia, one day, will be his. Or so the law says that you've considered alternatives. Your grandson, Alexander, is promising, bright-eyed, curious. He asks the right questions and doesn't faint at the sight of a political map. But he is young, and you are not eternal. Historians still debate whether you plan to name Alexander your heir instead of Paul. Some say you drafted a document. Others claim it was rumor. You, of course, said nothing. Because succession, like chess, is best played quietly until checkmate. In public, you begin emphasizing stability. You make a point of appearing at church services, even if you occasionally correct the priest's grammar under your breath. You tour military barracks. You update your will. You commission a new portrait of yourself, not youthful, but serene, the kind of image you want carved into memory. Privately, you write letters. Dozens. To foreign monarchs, to old allies, to philosophers long dead, but whose ideas still hum inside your skull like music boxes. You speak of legacy, that of the strange paradox of building a nation you will never live in. And always, you work. The desk remains full. The nights remain long. One evening, your valet finds you asleep with a volume of Herodotus on your chest and a draft decree under your hand. He doesn't wake you. He just adjusts your shawl and lets the candle burn. Sometimes, you wonder what will survive of you. The palaces, they will crumble. The laws, they'll be rewritten. Even the Hermitage may one day be just another museum. But maybe, just maybe, something quieter will last out of habit, out of belief. The idea that a ruler can also be a reader, that power doesn't have to shout, that dignity can whisper and still be heard. One morning, you hold a meeting with your inner circle. The topic is banal, supply chains in the Baltic. But halfway through a sentence, you pause. Not because you've lost your place, but because you've just realized something. This is what contentment feels like. Not excitement, not applause, just knowing you've done your part. You resume the sentence, you finish the meeting, and later, While walking your favorite corridor, you stop by a window. Snow is falling again, slow, deliberate, like a poem with only one line. I was here. Section 16. It starts, as these things always do, with a chair. You go to sit, as usual, just for a moment, between audiences. But your legs hesitate, just a little. A flicker of delay. You lower yourself more slowly than usual, and when you reach the cushion, there's a faint sigh in your bones, as if your joints have begun writing their own correspondence. You do not mention it. You simply ring for tea and continue reviewing reports. Your physicians hover more these days, not aggressively, not foolishly, just present. They adjust your shawls. They comment on your appetite. Point one of them dares to suggest rest. You raise one eyebrow that he adjusts his diagnosis. Active rest, perhaps? You nod and promptly schedule 3 more meetings. You're not sick, not precisely, but the palace feels heavier, the corridors longer, your memories closer. One morning, while reading a foreign dispatch, you find yourself smiling at a name, a minor noble from Silesia, someone you once danced with at a ball when you were 15. He had spilled punch on your glove and apologized in verse. You remember the poem. You remember his face. You do not remember what happened to him. That's the strange part about age. It's not that you forget. It's that memory becomes a library without a catalog, familiar, full, but occasionally untraceable. You still read each morning, still walk the gallery, still sign your name with elegant loops. But now, your hand sometimes shakes, not enough to ruin the signature, just enough to remind you. The ink is finite. You begin organizing your papers, your memoirs, your policies, the letter to Voltaire you never sent. You stack them in neat bundles, each labeled with silk ribbon and a sigh. You don't plan to stop ruling. You just plan to make it easier for whoever comes next, even if it's Paul. The court is quiet. They know, they don't say it, but they move with greater care. Their bows last longer. Their jokes are softer in a one-mentioned succession. Everyone feels it. One afternoon, you call for your grandson, Alexander. He arrives, eyes wide, hair too perfect to trust. You speak with him for an hour, not about thrones, not about politics, just ideas. You discuss ancient Greece, the difference between law and justice, whether kindness can be taught. He listens. That he doesn't take notes. You approve. After he leaves, you sit for a while in the blue chair by the window. The one with the worn armrest where your ring has carved a tiny groove over the years. The snow outside looks like a painting you once bought in Paris. You try to remember the artist. Fail. Smile anyway. You attend a final council meeting that month. You don't speak much, just nod. Your minister's notice. Point one brings you a thicker cloak the next day. You thank him with your eyes. The next morning begins like any other. Tea. Letters. A brief note from the gardener about the condition of the south-facing hedges. Then a stumble. A brief, silent collapse. A moment in which time forgets its lines. They find you still breathing. They carry you gently. You are placed in your chambers. The curtains are drawn. The physicians gather. Paul is summoned. You do not speak. Not clearly. But you hear them. You see the shape of worry on their faces, and you think, faintly, so this is what legacy looks like. That evening, someone lights the candles in the gallery. The hermitage stands still. Outside, snow begins to fall, and inside, the empire holds its breath. Section 17. The palace shifts into hush. It doesn't stop, of course. Palaces never truly sleep. But the steps soften, the doors creak less, and even the gossip tucks itself into corners. You are still alive. But the question is not if anymore. It's when. And everyone is practicing silence for the answer. Paul is in the next room. Pacing. He always paces when he's nervous. Heel click, like a metronome measuring the tempo of his anxiety. You used to find it irritating. Now it's oddly reassuring. A heartbeat through the wall. The physicians whisper, words like stroke and vital force. They mean well, But they don't understand what's truly slipping away. Not your health, your choreography, the daily rhythm of governance, quills and candles and letters in triplicate, is falling out of step, and in its place, stillness. You drift in and out. Dreams, memories, half-finished conversations all swirl together like a snow globe someone keeps shaking. You remember being Sophie. You remember dancing. You remember laughing so hard once during a diplomatic dinner that wine came out of your nose and the Austrian ambassador nearly proposed out of sheer confusion. That was a good night. Sometimes you hear voices, familiar ones, Potemkin chuckling about lemons, Voltaire misquoting himself with flair, your mother scolding gently about posture. You don't speak to them, but you nod, just in case they're watching. Paul enters at last. You see him as if through fog. He looks older than he is, not in years, but in ambition, in disappointment. You reach for his hand. He kneels. You try to speak. Your lips form a shape. He leans closer. You whisper, not words, but a sigh. And in that sigh is everything. Regret, hope, irritation, love, advice, sarcasm. He nods, though he understands none of it. Later, you are alone again. The room is dim. One candle, one cat, asleep, of course, one empress, and a sense, not of ending, but of folding, like a letter sealed. In another part of the palace, the council meets. They speak softly. They review protocols. They rehearse the future. And in their voices, your legacy takes its next breath. Outside, the river freezes solid, not violently, just completely. If the world itself pauses to hold space for your departure. The next morning, you do not wake. You are found precisely as they hoped, serene, warm beneath your shawl, your hand resting on a blank sheet of paper. N.O. final proclamation, N.O. dramatic gesture, just readiness. Russia will mourn. Bells will toll. Portraits will be draped in black. Poets will write verses they hope someone important reads. And still, carriages will rattle down icy streets. Bakers will knead dough. Teachers will point to maps. Soldiers will polish boots and mutter about the weather. Because this is what you built, an empire that breathes beyond its empress. Paul will reign, for a while. Then Alexander. Then others, with more titles and fewer books. But your name, it will hold. Not as a mother. Not as a monarch, a mind, a mirror, a myth. Catherine the Great, the German teen who rewrote herself into Russia's story, and then never left. Section 18. In the days after your passing, the palace becomes a monument. Not by decree. No sculptor chisels your likeness into the walls. But in the way people move, slower, like words spoken in a library. In the way they glance at your favorite chair as if expecting it to speak. In the sudden hush that accompanies the sound of your name. Catherine. Just that. No title. No echo. Just a presence that still fills the air. Paul is crowned. Finally. After decades of being the heir who waits, he is now the ruler, and he wastes no time in showing it. He reverses some of your policies, releases men you had imprisoned, rewrites court procedures to make them more, in his words, orderly. Less flexible, less you. He also changes the succession LAW, more inheritance through the maternal line. From now on, only sons. A quiet erasure of your path to powered AS. If rewriting the rules could undo your story. It cannot. Outside the palace, the people grieve, not with wailing or riots. This is not Paris, but with candles on windowsills. With songs sung just a little softer in the evening. With letters tucked into library books that simply say, "She taught us to read." Meanwhile, foreign courts scramble. Some see opportunity. Others see instability. They speculate. Will Russia weaken? Will it change course? Will it fracture? It won't. You didn't build a glass empire. You built a machine. Elegant, durable, slightly sarcastic. It will keep running. Your art remains. Your laws remain. The Hermitage opens its doors more widely now, slowly evolving from private passion to public temple. Children walk its halls, not knowing your name, but hearing it in every echo. One young girl, on her first visit, pauses in front of your portrait. She doesn't know who you are. She only knows that you look like someone who made decisions. She says she looks like she wasn't afraid. And her teacher smiles. Your memoirs are found, unfinished, scattered across leather-bound notebooks and scribbled margins. Some pages are edited to the point of near invisibility. Others are raw, confessional, too honest for daylight. Scholars will argue about what to publish. Some will say you were too proud. Others will call you the architect of a modern monarchy. They will all be wrong, and they will all be right. In time, the story simplifies. You become the great, not the foreigner, not the usurper. Just great. Point. One word, heavy, earned. And in the spaces between facts, between dates and documents and official portraits, your true self lingers to in the pages of a well-read philosophy book, in a law about how much salt a peasant can carry without a license, in the worn velvet cushion of a chair by the window, always just a little warm. Your spirit remains not in monuments, but in motion. In every question that begins, what if? In every answer that begins, well, according to Catherine. And though time will move on, will layer over you with wars, reforms, revolutions, anthems, you will never quite disappear, because Russia, at its core, will always remember the woman who once wandered into its story with a new name and a very full bookshelf. Section 19. Somewhere in a quiet archive, decades later, a clerk opens an old folio. Inside, a map, hand-inked, slightly faded. The Caspian Sea is spelled correctly this time. In the corner, a faint monogram. Your initials, barely visible. He doesn't recognize them, but he lingers on the map anyway, tracing the borders with one finger, wondering who drew them and how they knew. He doesn't know it, but he's following your footsteps. Like so many still do. History is a strange mirror. It reflects not just the face of the past, but the angles we choose to remember. And over time, your reflection changes. One decade, they call you enlightened. The next, autocratic. Some whisper reformer. Others hiss tyrant. You remain stubbornly unfiled. There are new rulers now, new wars, new philosophers who claim to have discovered truth like it's a misplaced glove. But still, the echoes remain. In law schools, students debate your reforms. In art galleries, curators whisper over your acquisitions. In quiet townships in Ukraine, buildings still stand with plaques bearing your name. There's a strange dignity in becoming myth, that it's not about being larger than life, that it's about being carved into it. A footnote in every conversation about modern Russia. A comparison lurking behind every powerful woman with an opinion and a library. Your letters are still studied, your quips still quoted, your life still dissected, but no biography ever quite captures you. They forget the way you tilted your head when amused, or how your handwriting changed slightly when you were hungry, or that you once banned the word must from court memos because you thought it was rude. Somewhere, a schoolgirl in St. Petersburg writes an essay about you. She's skeptical. She says you were ambitious, that you took too much, that you didn't free the serfs. She's not wrong. But she also notes, in the final paragraph, that you gave her a reason to look up from her textbook. T.O. wondered, T.O. questioned, T.O. consider ruling the world. That is your legacy, in the end, not perfection, permission. You didn't promise peace. You promised curiosity, and a nation that could imagine itself into something more than survival. Your story becomes a bedtime tale, strangely soothing, about the girl who arrived with books and ambition, who learned to dance the language of power, who ruled not just by decree, but by design, and who, even now, seems to lean in from the past and whisper, try harder. In the Hermitage, a tour guide gestures to a marble bust. This is Catherine, she says. She was complicated. The tourists nod. They take photos. They move on. But one child lingers. He stares at your stone smile and whispers, "Cool. You would have liked that." Section 20. And now, at the edge of your story, the winter hush returns. Not the icy silence of death, nor the solemn quiet of ceremony, but something gentler. The kind of stillness that follows a snowstorm, when all the branches are outlined in frost and the streets are waiting for footprints. Your story ends not with trumpets, not with tears, but with a soft, steady breath. Russia exhales and continues. In the weeks following your death, portraits are moved, flags lowered, official documents stamped with new names and fresh ink. Your initials fade from daily life, replaced by Paul's firmer, fussier style. But it's not your style that leaves an imprint, that it's your tempo. You change the rhythm of power. You prove that a foreign girl with ambition and patience could rewire an empire, brick by brick, book by book, conversation by conversation. You didn't storm gates. You adjusted locks. In the schools you opened, children continue to recite poetry. In the libraries you stocked, scholars still argue about Aristotle. In the courts you reformed, judgments are passed more evenly, if not perfectly. And in the minds of those who whisper your name, you remain, not as a ruler in a history book, but as an idea with a pulse. There will be others, rulers with louder voices, heavier crowns, flashier palaces, but few will rule as long. Fewer still will rule with your quiet insistence that thoughtfulness can be sovereign. And when people ask, "Who was Catherine?" they'll be told you were a monarch, a mother, a strategist, a reader. But those who've paid attention will know you were an editor of time, a curator of empire, a woman who once walked through a frozen country and melted just enough of it to matter. Now, your story folds into the quiet. The candles burn low. The snow drifts gently against palace walls. Somewhere, a page turns, and the next dream begins. And now, as the snow settles softly over St. Petersburg, and the last candle flickers low in the winter palace, we step gently back from Catherine's long, extraordinary life. No more letters to sign, no more borders to adjust. Just the sound of silence filling the halls she once walked. One careful footstep at a time. That you've been with her through revolutions and love letters, parades and quiet tea. That you've watched her rise, rule, and finally, rest. And now it's your turn to take a long, deep breath. Feel the weight of the blankets wrapped around you, the soft hum of your room, the safe stillness of this moment. There's nothing else to do right now. No more decisions, no more meetings, no empires to build. Just a quiet night to sleep through. Let your thoughts drift like powdered snow across rooftops. Let your breath slow. Let your eyes grow heavier. And if your mind wanders back to Russia, to candlelit halls, silver-haired queens, and well-worn maps, let it float, weightless, gentle, like an old letter tucked into a drawer, still fragrant with ink, still warm with memory, because the past is done, and your dreams are waiting. Sweet dreams. Good night.